Hello, welcome to the Wildline podcast. I'm your host, Dan. This is a podcast about movies and how much money they make at the box office. I'm doing a little bit later this week, so I'll try and talk about not only last weekend, but also what's been going on for the first part of this week and touch upon what is opening up this next weekend. We are in a sort of weird time frame for the movies. Like, the summer movie season, when I was growing up, always felt like, and this would be like the 90s, always felt like it went through August, all the way to when school started, which back then, where I was from, in a lot of places, was like the end of August. But now a lot of schools open up after Labor Day, at least where I'm from, back in Wisconsin. So the summer movie season seemed to last until school started. That's shifted a little bit. It feels like everything has shifted forward, so that the real summer movie season is essentially May through the end of July into the early part of August. I sort of deem it as like the summer lasts until like the second weekend of August, and then things start transitioning over into what I like to call, it's almost like the no man's land of late August all the way through October. October is when things sort of pick back up again. The weather's getting colder. People are in the full swing of fall. Younger people are in school or university, and people are having their lives are kind of normalized a bit, so they go and see the movies a little bit more than they normally do, because it's going to the movies, especially nowadays, is something that you kind of have to, slice about 3 hours out of your day to go and do it. It's not something you can just do if you're super busy and stressed out. So people tend to go when things are a little bit more quiet in their lives. And that's not the case in August, because people are usually traveling, especially the latter part of August, and they're getting ready to, a lot of people going back to school and university and all that kind of stuff. It's a big transition for people. And then also you got to include parents in that. You got to get your kid ready for school, and that's a big deal. So the summer is coming to a close, is essentially what I'm saying. And it's a really odd period. It's been a very strange summer overall. It's hard to even put like a bow on it and wrap it up and say this is what this summer was all about. For all intents and purposes, it was about Wonder Woman. Like that was the biggest story. Everything else seemed pretty underwhelming for the most part. Now, obviously, there's more stories to tell about that, and I will as we go along with this episode and future episodes. But it has just been the oddest summer. One of the oddest ones I remember. There was another really quiet one a few years ago, and I can't remember what year it was. Maybe 14, maybe like 3 years ago, where this summer just felt like super, super underwhelming. And this is one of those summers. It's just been quiet, and a lot of the bigger movies that were supposed to do decently well just haven't performed, and a lot of franchises are essentially over. They died this summer. Transformers, Pirates of the Caribbean, Planet of the Apes, those are all, I think, dead franchises now, because they did not live up to expectations whatsoever. And you had a lot of movie franchises or universes that were supposed to be launched this summer. I'm thinking about The Mummy and the Universe Monster Darkverse, or whatever the hell they called it, or we're gonna call it. I mean, I don't think they're gonna scrap the whole thing, but that's like the maiden voyage of the Titanic. Like, it just sank. And we'll talk a little bit more about this, but Valerian has been just an epic historical flop. That was supposed to start a whole universe for Europa Corp, and I guess they wanted to compete with Marvel. I don't know what the fuck they were thinking. Let's be honest. Everybody knew that was a disaster from the start. But I digress. Let's start with talking about what happened this weekend at the box office, and I'll touch a little bit upon what's happening Monday and Tuesday. But I think the weekend is sort of the harbinger of the true performance of these films, and sort of understand how they're doing, why they're doing well, why they're doing bad, and what that means about the box office in general. Number one this last weekend was Christopher Nolan's Dunkirk with $50 million. It picked up let's see, opened up at 19 on Friday, almost 20 million on Friday, did 17 on the Saturday, and then a nice decent 24% drop on Sunday for 13. So it did pretty well. It did about 6 million on Monday and about 7 million on Tuesday. So not massive drops for the weekday. Those are pretty good. The overall performance here has been, I don't know, this one was really strange. And I say that just because it did 5.5 on the previews. So you're expecting, if you're ever wondering how to predict what a film's going to do opening weekend based on its preview number, Thursday preview numbers, go to boxofficereport.com, which is an awesome website. This guy has a great Twitter, runs a great website, has some really fascinating data, but he has a great chart for preview grosses to opening weekend grosses to total grosses, and like the ratios and stuff. Based on what I was seeing, that $5.5 million preview on Thursday, you know, at least 50 million. You're looking at mid 50s, low 60s, or on higher. Pirates of the Caribbean did 5.5 million, the exact same amount, did $63 million for the weekend. Star Trek Beyond, very similar number, did 60 million for the weekend. 22 Jump Street, same number, did 57. And there's weird exceptions like Secret Life of Pets did the same, but you know, like children's film previews are depressed because it's Thursday night and parents don't want to take their kids to a movie on Thursday night, do they? No, they don't, because that did $5.3 million in its preview and then ended up doing over $100 million for opening weekend. So based on the previews, Dunkirk looked like it was going to do very well. It looked like it was going to break out. And remember, Dunkirk had tracking around $45 million for the weekend. That's what Warner Brothers was saying. That's what people were expecting. So anything in the mid 50s would be great. It ended up at 50.5, which is not bad, but it suggests a couple of things. It suggested a front-loaded audience, and when you relate that number to the high quality that the film clearly has, like critics loved it, 93% Rotten Tomatoes, 83% audience score. I'm interested by that discrepancy, right? Because a lot of my favorite critics who reviewed this basically called it a masterpiece. Like, it's supposed to be one of the best war films ever made. I would want to see that audience score in the 90s then, right? And it's not. So that suggests to me there might be a little bit of a disconnect between the audience and critics on this one. It seemed maybe a little bit too arty for mass audiences on a summer release. I'm not saying that like that's a bad thing. I'm just saying that for the average person, they may have not connected with it as well as the critics did. Based on that high quality and the cinema score of A-, you would think that the drops for that weekend internally would be low, but they weren't. So what I'm seeing here, and sort of reading the tea leaves a little bit, it's not really the tea leaves if I'm looking back at something, terrible metaphor. But looking at the data and just thinking about the movie in general, you got the Christopher Nolan fanboy situation happening a little bit here. You have the Harry Styles thing happening here. But without a doubt, it's front loaded because you would expect it to do at least mid 50s with that preview number. And then when you look at you take the quality of the film into perspective, you're like, oh yeah, this is going to do like 55. It's going to do 60, and it didn't. Right? So there's a lot of things to consider with that. You could say it's the fanboy stuff. You could say the fact that a lot of maybe younger women went to go see Harry Styles in it. That's a possibility. Another possibility is something that I brought up a few weeks ago or a week ago when we were talking about this film getting released. World War II films just don't play well anymore. It is a genre that's been around for, 60 years, 70 years since the war ended. It's been like the new American Western. There's always like a huge World War II film that comes out. Every decade there's some masterpiece of a World War II film. In the 90s we had Saving Private Ryan, Thin Red Line, which are two masterpieces that came out in the same year, I believe, 98. And then last decade you had, I guess it was last decade. When did Inglourious Basterds come out? Maybe that was a little more recent than I thought. And I have to look that up. What I'm basically trying to say is American World War II films are an institution. but recently they have not done very well. And my guess is that 2009 was Inglourious Basterds, so it counts as last decade. Thank you very much. One of my favorite films. I'm also a Quentin Tarantino sort of nerd and apologist, so I just absolutely love that film. So World War II films have always been around. There's always been some big wins with them, but Inglourious Basterds was the last big World War II breakout film. And you can't overlook the fact that it was partly a pastiche and a parody, which I've talked about before in terms of genre. That's sort of like the canary in the coal mine for the genre. When a film sort of pokes fun at or is kind of wink wink with the genre conventions, in this case World War II films, and they play around with those conventions and it does very well, that suggests that people have gotten a little bit tired with the genre. And I think that sort of bears out here looking at the last few years of World War II films. And it's like Dunkirk was just like a really hard bet. It's a really hard case to make for someone to go out of the way these days in 2017 over the summer to go see a World War II film, unless they're really into Christopher Nolan, Harry Styles, or really want to see an arty World War II film. And I think that's where I think you got that audience, and that audience is $50 million, and it's not any more than that. If this was like maybe a little bit less arty, maybe a little bit less dour. I mean, the marketing for this was so depressing. If it was a little bit of a different movie, I could see it doing 60, 70 or even higher. But Christopher Nolan wasn't going to compromise. He had a very specific vision for this film. Warner Brothers let him go for it, and I think it's going to be a win. It's just not your typical summer blockbuster win, right? It's not opening over 100. It'll end up probably based on the high quality. I think it's going to have good legs. I'm thinking like at least 150 on this. It's also super quiet over the next few weeks. The drops on Monday and Tuesday weren't that low. Not that you can really read that much into Monday, Tuesday drops right afterwards. It's like too limited data or information. But I do think that it's going to hold on well and hit that 3x mark at least for a $150 million take domestically. Internationally, I have no idea what's going to do, to be honest with you. I'm not even going to dive into it. So I think it's a good win for Warner Brothers and for Christopher Nolan. I think he's regained a little bit of his mojo and confidence. Not that his last two movies, Dark Knight Rises and Interstellar, were bad. I just think creatively, and if you asked people what their favorite Christopher Nolan film were, Dark Knight Rises, for the most part, is universally panned, even among the fanboys, as being kind of not great, especially compared to Dark Knight. And Interstellar, it's just like, I don't know, that movie is such a train wreck by the end. He certainly went for it, and certainly it is a very interesting and engaging film. But I think artistically at the end, you're just like, what the fuck is this? Like, it doesn't even make remote sense by the end. And it doesn't matter how smart you are or like how much you understand quantum physics and stuff like that. By the end, you're just like, this is fucking a ridiculous plot. And it makes not even basically zero sense. And then, of course, like the fanboys are going to attack me or whatever. Oh, it totally makes sense. Here's this 30-page outline that I made of Interstellar and how it makes sense. Like, that's the problem with Interstellar, is it tried to be as intelligent as Primer, and it's just not. Like, Primer is the ultimate sort of time travel movie because, like, the dude who wrote it is kind of nuts, and he not necessarily believes it, but he was crazy enough to really think through every single step. Not that Christopher Nolan didn't, it just wasn't that fanatical at the end with sticking to the concept that it had laid down. And so he kind of pulled his punches at the end, and I think it really hurt the film. Because I think Interstellar, the first first third are basically a masterpiece. And then by the time you get to that last third, you're just like, eh. So I think overall, like, Christopher Nolan's had a little bit of a slump creatively. And this sort of gets him right back on the right track. It's not like he's going anywhere. Christopher Nolan's an institution now in American film, and will be. I guess you call it American film. He's Australian. Isn't he Australian? I don't even know. But he makes all his movies here, and I guess he's a U.S. citizen now. But he's never going to go away. He's always going to be, he's part of that new crop of directors who, like Paul Thomas Anderson and Wes Anderson, who are Denis Nouveau. What the hell is his name? The guy did Arrival. Why did I think Christopher Nolan was Australian? He's British. I'm so stupid. I mean, it's not a simple mistake. Denis Villeneuve, what the hell his fucking name is. The guy did Arrival, and he's an amazing director. I just wish his name was easier to pronounce and not be so French. But Christopher Nolan is one of those upper echelon directors now in the world. And I think Dunkirk definitely solidifies his place as like, he's not going to go away. Like, he can take on any subject and to make a really fascinating, interesting movie. In this case, a lot of the critics are calling this one of the best war films of all time. So he's making his place in film history, essentially. And Dunkirk is another notch in his belt. But that was number one this weekend. It's been doing number one yesterday and Monday as well. So it's sticking in there and doing really well. Number two last weekend was kind of a surprise. Going into the weekend, Girls Trip, a rated R comedy that focuses on a group of African American women who I believe go to New Orleans. Almost kind of maybe like, I don't know the subplot or the plot to it, but it seemed kind of like maybe like a Bridesmaids-esque type movie. Kind of girls behaving badly, kind of like bad moms. Was tracking pretty high for what it was. I don't want to call it a minor film, but they weren't doing a super, super wide release on it. They weren't releasing it to over 2,000 theaters. They were releasing it in 4,000 theaters, which is a super wide release. So Universal kind of gave it a limited wide release. So the tracking on it even so is in the 20s, which was high for a movie like that. It ended up just crushing it. Even the Sunday estimates were off on this. They said 30. It ended up at 31 on 25, almost 2,600 screens. That's outrageous. Its per theater average was only 1,500 less than Dunkirk. Its per theater average was 12,000 per theater. This is like a huge breakout that I hope the studios are taking notice, because this is how you release a film like this. This is how you make a film this is how you make a rated R comedy work again. I've talked about rated R comedies at length over the last year and how they're in this weird slump, and it's just like flop after flop after flop. The House, rated R comedy this year, a complete disaster. Only made $25 million in total so far in its fourth weekend. Girls Trip has made $6 million more in its first 3 days, right? So they hit a huge home run here. It might even be a grand slam. And here's why I'm going to say that. The budget on Girls Trip was $19 million. $19 million. The house budget, $40 million. They're going to make so much. Universal's going to make so much money on this. And I know that's to be the case for a couple of reasons. And it's not just the great opening. A Girls Trip also scored an A+ cinema score. An A+ cinema score is super, super rare. It's about as rare as an F, which almost never happens. There's only like seven movies in the history of cinema score that have gotten an F. So they hit a home run with the marketing, and they hit a home run with the quality. It's the right film at the right time, and they have pretty much a wide open next month or so, where this is gonna just print money. And this is a big story. This is a big story because there's certainly the African American element to it, where oftentimes African American centered films, for whatever reason, the studios think that they can't play well in all across America and Canada or the world, right? They sort of self-limit the release on these films. That's what they did here. Universal kind of like hedged their bets. They're like, we're not going to put it out on 3,500 screens, which would be a normal release for a film like this. we're going to put it out on 2,500 screens. They probably pre-selected theaters that they thought would be maybe a higher proportion of African Americans live around those theaters. And so they sort of did a little bit more of a pinpointed wide release. They probably were thinking that, like, okay, it's going to play well with the African American demo, and maybe not that well outside of it. Well, hopefully they're learning their lesson. That, like, that's not really the case anymore. And I think just the fact that the film is, fronted by, I think it's 4 or 5 African American women, doesn't mean that it's not going to play well in a lot of different areas. And that may seem like common sense in 21st century America, but Hollywood is just super conservative, and I don't know, their track record with minority led films and directed films is just honestly not great. It's, look at the unions of the industry, like especially like the Directors Guild of America. It's an old white boys club for the most part. Still, it is a very, I don't know the term. I don't want to say like it's an old school industry. I'll put it that way, as politely as I can. And so they tend to think kind of, they're 20 or 30 years behind what's actually happening in society and culture. So they put a movie like Girls Trip out there thinking like, all right, like we'll get like the female African-American demo. We'll get those numbers. They only gave $19 million budget. Like they're probably expecting this to pull in like what, maybe 40 million tops for its entire run. And now it's just exploded. Because it's playing well in a lot of different demos, right? And I think I hope that they're understanding that you can't just pigeonhole films like that anymore. It doesn't work. It doesn't make any cultural sense, especially with people who are younger, like millennials and post millennials. They just kind of see the world a different way, and the fact that the movie centers on African American women, like that's not gonna turn off a 15-year-old white kid like it maybe would have 40, 50 years ago. Like it's just not that world anymore. And we noticed that if you looked at Medea Halloween last year, one of the most fascinating parts about that was that it played completely different than the other Medea films. The earlier Medea films tended to be, heavy on the African American audience, right? But with Medea, for whatever reason, that movie, it played well across the board, and all different types of demos were seeing it. I guarantee you that's what is happening with Girls Trip, and hopefully it's showing the studios that like, look, just because African Americans are in the film doesn't mean just African Americans are going to see it. Right? It's just like a stupid assumption that they do because they're conservative business people and they're kind of idiots sometimes, to be honest with you, and they don't catch up with cultural trends very quickly. And also there's not a lot of people of color who are represented well in the industry. And so maybe there's a lot of people to advocate for a position that is maybe more common sense and fair. And so I hope Girls Trip I hope it teaches them a lesson that like this should have there's no reason this wasn't playing on 3,500 different screens. I'm not saying they're racist or anything like that. I'm just saying that like they don't think in a way that tells them that this movie is going to play well. And maybe that's prejudice on some level on their part, or maybe they're just being overly conservative business people. But Medea would have made a lot more money if it opened a lot more theaters. Girls Trip would have made a lot more money if it opened on a lot more theaters. There's no reason it should be under 3,500 theaters on its opening weekend. So they screwed up, but hopefully the fact that it did so well that they won't make that same mistake again. That's my took a little sip of bourbon here. That's my rant on that film. This is, I think, Girls Trip and Wonder Woman. Hey, it's the summer of women, I guess. Are two of the bigger stories so far. We'll see how Girls Trip plays. I think based on what I'm seeing, the multiple on this is going to be pretty freaking high. If you look at Bad Moms last year, it had like a 4x or maybe even higher than 4x multiplier. I don't know if that's going to happen here. I'm seeing at least 3. I think it's going to break 100 pretty easily. And for that budget being that low at only 19 million, and the marketing was decently high, but it wasn't in your face, so it probably was domestically a $30 billion spend for marketing, if that. Absolute home run. And the ROI on this is going to be fantastic, and that means that Universal is going to make more movies like this. And maybe Girls Trip has saved rated R comedies. Who would have thought? Girls Trip was going to save rated R comedies? Because based on going to this weekend, it kind of seemed like a month ago when I saw the trailer, I was like, okay. It looks kind of like a copy of Hangover, Bridesmaids, and stuff like that. But what got me intrigued in the film was that they did this, and this is a new marketing technique they've been doing, and I noticed it first with Manchester by the Sea, is that like there's like a little 30-second promo, and Manchester by the Sea was like Matt Damon was on. I was like, what the hell is Matt Damon doing in this commercial? He's like, oh, I helped make this film, blah, blah, blah. It was this really kind of like old school way of promoting a film. And Girls Trip did this awesome thing when they sat down the cast and kind of had them bullshit for a while. And I was like, this is awesome. Like, I kind of really want to see this movie now based on the cast interaction and like this little small promo they were doing. It was a really good idea to get people engaged with that film, who otherwise may have saw the trailer and be like, oh, I feel like I've seen this movie 100 times before. But by doing that sort of alt marketing type thing, I don't know, it just really, it seemed more interesting. And when you saw the actors talk about their characters, it was like, oh, like I'm into this. It was more engaging than normal marketing. But Girls Trip's a big story, I think, a huge win. And it's continuing to do well this week. Let's see, yesterday it did 4.4 million, and on Monday it did 3.4. 60%, 58% drop on Monday, which is not terrible, but pretty high. It is a comedy. And then did really well on the Tuesday, jumped almost 30% for the Cheap Tuesdays. So we're going to keep an eye on this one. I think it's going to be one of the stories of the year. I really do. Okay. I've like babbled on for like a half hour about the first two movies. Who gives a shit? If you're listening to this podcast, you're already a nerd and probably don't care. In any event, I'll try and pick it up a bit for these last. Probably get to the top 10. We'll see what happens. Number 3 this last weekend was Spider-Man: Homecoming, $22 million, an okay 50% drop. Not great, not terrible. Lost 200 screens. Per theater average is about 5,300. It sits at $250 million total. What's there to say about Spider-Man: Homecoming? I talked about it at length the last couple of podcasts. I don't want to ramble on about it. I just think overall it suggests that there is something happening with the comic book genre that means there's a stylistic change going on. And Spider-Man: Homecoming was part of the old set. And the Logans, Deadpools, Wonder Womans are part of the new set. Speaking of which, like Comic-Con was this last weekend, and I'm not like a super nerd, but I always pay attention and watch all the trailers that come out. And I was super struck by the stylistic changes that have occurred. Look, I'm thinking about the Thor trailer. What the flying F was that? Like, what is that movie gonna be? It looked like I felt like I was on acid watching that. It was so hyper colorized. Maybe they watched that YouTube essay guy who was like, every single MCU film is like totally, the coloring scheme is all grayscale. It looks so dour. Maybe they listened to the guy. I don't know. But the new Thor movie, look, I'm not the huge comic book guy, right? But the new Thor movie looked pretty fucking interesting just based on the colors alone and the vibrancy of it. It really popped. Spider-Man: Homecoming felt like it could come out 15, 20 years ago. Didn't really seem that special. It was super front loaded. It sounds like it might leg it to 300. The drops have gotten less recently. But you know, there's a lot of ways you can look at it. The way I look at it is Sony spent a lot of money on this movie. They expected it to do well over $300 million. It's a little bit of an underperformer for them, I think, at the end of the day. Now everybody's going to jump, oh my God, it's $300 million. What are you talking about? You're crazy. That's not how the industry works. It doesn't work that way. You don't build a product and put in all that money and then expect to only get back $50 million in profit, right? The expectations for Spider-Man Homecoming were probably well over $150 million product, up to $200 million in pure profit. That's probably not going to happen. I could see maybe 150. It might get there. It's going to do well internationally. It's not like it's just the United States. But when Deadline comes out with their list next year of the most profitable films, it'll probably be on there. But it's ROI, and I talked a lot about this on the podcast, it's going to be under that 50 cents per dollar spent, right? They're going to make less than 50 cents in profit for every dollar that they spent on that film. And they want to get over that 50% line. So overall, it's probably going to be a financial win without a doubt. Contextually within what we do here and what I talk about, it's a little bit of underperformance for Sony. Number 4 this last weekend was War for the Planet of the Apes with a disastrous 63% drop, even though it added 80 theaters. It's only its second weekend. How do you drop 60% in your second weekend when you're supposed to be a huge blockbuster? Awful. $5,000 per theater average. Sits at $98 million. This series is over. Like I can say that with confidence. They're not going to make any more of these films. The budget on this was only $25 million, less than Spider-Man. And I know they spent well over 50. No, I'm going to say like probably $60-70 million just on marketing for the domestic market on this. It just was not a good bet. I don't know. Like the War for the Planet of the Apes, apparently the last one was great. Apparently this one is great. This is the problem with making a movie like this, even though it's great, even though it's part of a proven IP that people connect with and like, right? There still is the problem of, is this going to attract people when it gets released? And that sounds like a stupid, really common sense thing to think about. But in what world did the movie that they make, War for the Planet of the Apes, how does that play well in the third week of July? Like what was in their head that said, hey, here's this movie. It's super dark. It's basically takes entirely in place during the winter. It just did not seem like a very smart move to put this movie out now. I feel like it would have played a lot better this fall. If this got released in October, once again, number one, don't spend $150 million on a movie like this. 2, don't release in the middle of July if it's this dark. The problem is they lock in these release dates 3-4 years out. Right, so they had this real estate. It was like, we're not going to give up the third week in July. There's no way we're going to give that up. So they just move forward with it, and what ends up happening is you get this sort of really, it's not necessarily a flop, but it's definitely underperformance. It's gonna be in the break even territory. It feels like. It may squeak by with like a $25 million profit, but Fox is not going to be happy about this. I think it puts a nail in the coffin of the series. I think the Planet of the Apes series, this latest reboot, is over with this film. So that's that. Speaking of things being over, number 5, Valerian, the City of 1,000 Planets. There's so much to say about this movie, and I actually don't even want to really talk about it that much, just because it's kind of just a waste of time. But it is fascinating for a few reasons. The moment this got announced, or the moment it came on my radar, which was probably like 7-8 months ago, it didn't make any sense to me. What I normally do is, because I'm a super box office nerd, I play Hollywood Stock Exchange, which is like a fantasy game for the box office. And I do a lot of market research, right? Like a normal stock analyst would do, except my money's not real and my profits aren't real. So I look about, not really a year, but like 9 to 7 months out for really good investments, right? You look at the director, you look at who's the studio, who's involved, and you can make bets on that, right? And usually I get those bets kind of right. It's not that hard to look at what's coming out and say, oh, like, give me any combination of people and I can tell you whether it's going to do well or not, and be right about 60, 70, 80% of the time, more like 80% of the time. Not that I'm like a soothsayer or special. It's like, if you just pay attention and you follow the industry, you can tell it's going to be a quality product or not. And quality is the number one determining factor in terms of success. Not necessarily artistic quality, but just like product quality. Like Transformers, that's a bad example. But it sort of gets to the point. Like, a movie like Transformers is creatively shit. It's awful. But the product of it is fantastic because it's exciting. People love it. People are going to go and see it and be have a really good time. And that's what makes it a good product. So when you're looking at stuff, you got to look for just different patterns of how, like, another one that I saw recently was Geostorm, right? And I saw that one like 6 months ago. I immediately invested, right? Because it was super lowly. The price was super low in it. And I know those movies, and I just saw the first trailer for it this weekend, or actually last night when it so The Big Sick. And it looks like a total shit show. Like an absolute 2012 Day After Tomorrow, same director. Just mess of a film, but people are gonna go see it, right? People are definitely gonna be like, "Oh, this looks ridiculous and stupid. I'm gonna go see this." I guarantee it's gonna open to at least 20 million at the box office. I guarantee it. I might even bet my life on it. But you just know, right? If you follow boxes long enough, you can see the different combinations of movies coming out, even if you haven't seen a single still or a trailer, and have a good understanding of how well it's going to do, or what tier is it in. Is it an art film? Is it a smaller release? Is it like, it's going to make 10 to 50 million, or is it like over 50 million? Is it over 100 million? There's some films that you can just tell. Valerian had a higher budget than Spider-Man Homecoming. Spider-Man Homecoming was expected and is expected to make well over $300 million. That was the expectation from Sony when they wrote the check for $175 million production budget and another $170 million at least for marketing, right? Tons of money involved here. Valerian, I saw the production budget. I saw who was involved. I saw who the lead was. That's actually what tipped me off to the movie. This is a little bit of a rant and a sidetrack, but Paper Towns has been on pay cable HBO for like the last year straight, and it's like always on. And I work from home, and I'll have the TV on in the background sometimes, and Paper Town comes on, and it's just in midway between, and I'm like, fuck it, I'll just leave it on here. Why the hell not? It's a fascinating movie, right? It's got a really good soundtrack. But what stood out to me in that film was how terrible Cara Delevingne was in it. She's a model, I guess an actress. She's just one of those younger women who is everywhere, has a very punkish kind of rude attitude. Like if you see her in an interview, she comes across as a total jerk. And she basically ruined that movie. That movie had the potential to be an absolute classic. But I think she just ruined the whole thing. And I feel her, I think she's super off-putting on almost every single interaction I've seen with her on an interview or whatever. And even in that film, then I was like, I need to know what she's up to. Like, well, how is she getting work? Like, how is she, whatever. That's a whole nother thing. Well, it turns out if you look closer at her background, her dad's like a super billionaire, real estate, London guy. And I can guarantee you that's played a little bit into her fame and opportunities here. She also has a rabid fan base, which whatever, each to their own. If people want to be fans of her, that's cool. I think she's a terrible actress. And I saw what she was going to be in, and I saw this Valerian thing, and it seemed like it was a big deal. And then I looked at the production budget. I was like, wait, what is this? And then I saw who was attached, Europa. And Europa Corp has been trying to release films recently, and they've been absolute disasters. There's just an article that they lost. I can't remember the number. It was like maybe $100 million or something like that. It's been an absolute train wreck. STX got involved, who's a newer sort of distributor with a lot of Chinese money backing them. They're trying to take on the industry a little bit. This had the recipe for a massive, huge flop. And people could see it coming months in advance. If you talk to any box office nerd 3 months ago, they know what Valerian is. They know that's going to flop. Like everybody just knew in the sort of nerdy community surrounding the box office that this was not going to go anywhere. So when it opened last weekend and only did $17 million, it wasn't that surprising. But it shouldn't be any less shocking of a flop than it really was and is. This is one of the worst flops in film history, hands down. There's articles being thrown around about how STX or Europa Corp have avoided losses because they pre-sold the film. Whatever. I don't care. Somebody somewhere is losing tens of millions of dollars. I think the losses are higher than that, in like the $150 million loss range, maybe even higher. This is an epic disaster that will, I think, really hurt STX in the long run. Europa Corp, I think, might be finished with releasing films now after this. It's destroying companies. It's just a total train wreck. And what blows my mind about it is I could tell that 8 months ago by just looking at who was in the cast, who was producing it, and what the budget was. I didn't need to see anything about the plot or anything about, or no trailer. I was like, I know this is going to flop because it's just a really shitty idea, based on a pretty obscure, I believe, French comic book, that at best should have been given like maybe a $19 million budget. There's no way you would spend more on this film than you did on Girls Trip. There's just no way. There's no built-in real IP in America that's going to matter. It seemed like a terrible idea from its inception, and it's turned out to be the case. And what does it say about the broad sort of business of filmmaking? Well, number one, it just proves to you why there's only a few big major studios, and they all make blockbusters, and they kind of repeat themselves with these blockbusters because they're safe bets, right? When you're making a film of this caliber, a major blockbuster, you're talking costs that normally exceed $500 million to release it. So you're talking $500 million to put this product out there, whether it be in the theater, on TV, on streaming, or whatever. It costs $500 million oftentimes, if not a lot higher, So there is massive amounts of money involved here. And that's why the industry has consolidated a lot. Some studios have shut down over the last 20 years. And I think companies like STX and Europa Corp are trying to take on the big boys. And it's not easy to do. Because someone like a Fox or a Warner Brothers or Universal, or especially Disney, they get what it takes to create a huge blockbuster. And it's kind of cookie cutter, but it works. Look at MCU. MCU is the ultimate example of this. They have a formula, they have perfected it, and it's working well. And they will, change it up a bit every so often so it doesn't get stale. But for all intents and purposes, they understand the process. STX, Europa Corp, does not. And they're going to lose their shirts on this, right? They basically put $500 million, well, probably not $500 million. Let's say conservatively, this film is going to cost to release worldwide on all platforms. I'm going to say probably $400 million is what it'll come down to. They put $400 million of chips on red on the roulette table, right? It was a massive bet. And the reason why those huge corporations do what they do is that they have a process and they have a risk management formula and analysis that they do on these films before they greenlight them. And they have there's a great bit in the Wes Anderson film Steve Zissou, Life Aquatic, where the bondsman is like on the set making sure everything goes well. That's essentially how it works, right? When you're dealing with $400-500 million, you have armies of people that are making sure this thing goes well. And I guarantee you that's the reason why something like MCU works so well, is that there's always overseers at every level to say, hey, this isn't going well, this is going well, here's what we can do. We got to, at the end of the day, they want to make hundreds of millions of dollars in profit. And you can't do that unless you have a very, very sure bet, or you have an amazing group of people working for you, or you get really lucky. Valerian, I don't know. Maybe it was just missing so many different elements of a blockbuster. The cast was unknown. The story was an IP. And what's funny about this is you can relate it back to one of the biggest flops ever, John Carter. Another sort of sci-fi huge sort of space epic opera, maybe trying to tap into the Star Wars sort of concept that had a great director. The director of Valerian's not bad. He did Fifth Element. I mean, the guy gets those types of movies. But there wasn't any built-in IP. RIP PD or RIPD also comes to mind as another huge, massive flop, sort of related to this sort of sci-fi world where there's just no built-in audience. And maybe this would have worked 20 years ago or 30 years ago. I think maybe it would have. Maybe you spend like a lot less money making it, but you could have got people into the seats back then by having a really good movie, and it plays, one city, then the next city. It was a lot slower of a release schedule, so the word of mouth could spread more organically offline as it did back then. But with this, you need millions of people in the seats first weekend. They didn't get it, and so it's going to go nowhere now. And so it's just an epic disaster. I'm going to talk about it at length probably the rest of the year because I'm so fascinated by this absolute POS of a movie. I'm not even saying that quality wise. It's a POS of a product. You just cannot come out of the blue and try to make a blockbuster. It will not work. It has to be within the studio system. There are some exceptions, right? But those exceptions are movies that expected to make 20 million total ended up making 175, and I'm referencing Get Out, where that was definitely a bet, but it was a small bet, because if Get Out goes bad, you're gonna lose, maybe not even lose any money, maybe lose like a few million. But if it goes well, you make this huge profit. What you don't do is put $400 million down on the card table and say, well, let's cut the deck and see who's the highest card. Like, it's just a bad bet. It doesn't make any sense. And that's what Valerian was, and everybody knew it was going to fail, and it did fail. That's enough about Valerian. I literally could talk about Valerian for a very long time, but I'm not going to. Let's quickly go through these. Despicable Me 3, $13 million this weekend. Great 30% drop. Typical children's film drop. Lost 600 theaters. And its fourth weekend, it's at $213 million. Per theater average is pretty healthy at $3,700. Baby Driver still sticking around. Great 30% drop. Lost 500 screens. Per theater average was $2,400. Its current take so far in its fourth weekend is $84 million. A breakout win for Edgar Wright. He really needed one. Creatively very well liked within the nerd cult film people. They love him. But he needed a big win commercially, and Baby Driver is his win. Number 8 was The Big Sick, which I saw last night. Did $5 million over the weekend, 33% drop, good drop. Unfortunately, its per theater average is too low to have it stick around for a while at only $1,900. I talked a little bit about this on Twitter. If you follow my Twitter, It was an interesting experiment, but it's a failure. You know, it was an art film rom-com that was going to play well in the cities. It was never going to play well in the middle of the country. I don't know why they spent over $20 billion to market it that way. It didn't need to do that. It wasn't created as a mass market rom-com. So I don't know why they tried to, force that square peg into a round hole. Like, it didn't make any sense to me why they were pushing it so hard. I think Amazon Studios just wants to be popular. They want to get their name out there, and they saw The Big Sick as a good product to push. Like they did with Manchester by the Sea last fall. It just didn't go very well, and it's going to disappear pretty quickly. Its legs are going to be great. It might stretch it out to 40 million at the end of the day. Definitely possible. But it was kind of a failure as a wide release, which is pretty common with limited arty films that try to go wide. It's just very recently they've not done well. Number 9 was Wonder Woman with another crazy drop, 32% drop on its 8th weekend, lost 770 theaters. Per theater average was 2,338 to be exact. Total take so far is 389. The big story there is that it is now the number 1 film of the summer officially, and it will win. Wonder Woman has won this summer, which I think is absolutely one of the biggest stories of the year. I put it up there. It's probably the biggest story of the year, maybe. I put it up there with Get Out and Split doing really well, especially Get Out is like the most surprising sort of telltale signs of where the industry is going to go. Comic book movies are not going away. There's still a huge audience for them, but you got to do something different with them. They got to be interesting. They got to be something new and innovative, and that's what Wonder Woman was. That's why it did so well. Number 10 was Wished Upon, 2.4 million. A terrible 54% drop. It is a horror film. Per theater average was just over or just under 1150. Total take so far for Wished Upon was 10.5 million. I don't know what to say about that one. It was kind of a shitty horror film that just threw out there. Broad Green was a distributor, but it still made money. It still made 10.5 million. Like the production budget was 12 million. That seems pretty high for a movie like that. I don't know why they spent over $5 million to make it. But I think, not a great performance by the Search Imagination. But it only cost 12 million, so it's not a massive flop. Kind of the story of the rest of the top 20, I'll sort of pick out some highlights. Cars 3 is still sticking around at $144 million so far. Wow, that movie collapsed, didn't it? $104 million, that is not great. I basically called that series dead in the water too after it didn't open very well. But wow, that is bad. It's not even gonna make it. It'll just make it past 150 maybe. Cars 2 did 191. Cars, the original, did 244. But if you do adjusted for inflation, ticket inflation that is, Cars 2 did 212. And the original Cars did 331. So this is kind of a disaster relatively to what the other films did. Now those movies probably made a lot of profit. Cars 3 is probably going to break even, but it's definitely not doing well enough for them to do another one. Transformers, still in the theaters. It felt like it came out like 6 years ago. It's only its 5th weekend. Per theater average is close to the Mendoza line for a wide release at about 1,000. Total take was 127. That series is absolutely over. They will never make another Transformers movie as part of this series of films. They might do a reboot, but I doubt it. I don't think they're gonna do a reboot for like at least a decade. Good riddance. I hated that series of films. I thought they were pretty trashy. Despite the fact that they're fun, got the butts in the seats and people like to go see them. It's like going to see 4th of July fireworks on a screen. It's like, what the hell's the point? Anything else? 47 meters down. It's still sticking around. $42 million so far. The House is such an epic disaster. It lost 1,200 theaters last weekend. 75% drop in its 4th weekend. So bad. Below the Mendoza line, $950 per theater. over the weekend. Just about $25 million total. And it's such a good movie to play off of Girls Trip. Rated R comedies, kind of like the, normal people doing bad things type thing. Girls Trip has just been a massive grand slam. I think it's going to be a grand slam. The Weeknd was so well for that film, did so well. But The House was just a disaster from the start. You got to wonder, what's the difference? Why does Girls Trip do so well and The House did so poorly? I think a lot of it had to do with marketing and just the type of film that it was. The House just seemed very boring and there's no hook to it whatsoever. Girls Trip, it looked like kind of a variant of Hangover or Bridesmaids. It looked exciting. And the stars came out and really sold that film. The House, I think I saw Will Ferrell and Conan. That was it. That's not good enough. I think that's mostly it to talk about. Beguiled is a failure on wide release. Told You. A Ghost Story, which opened decently okay, limited, has fallen off a cliff as it's expanded to 43 theaters now. It only has a $3,200 per theater average for the weekend. That sucks. I mean, it looks like a really cool movie. It's A24. A24 can do no wrong in my book. But this is a perfect example of an art film that you keep in the big cities and you don't let it get out of the big city. Just don't try and release it anywhere that isn't, a city of 8 million people or 7 million people. Just don't do it. There's no point. You're not going to make any money. There's no reason why that Ghost Story shouldn't be on VOD within 2 weeks. Or even streaming in 2 weeks. Why doesn't Amazon just buy this film, put it out for a month, and then put it on Amazon Prime? I'd watch it immediately. Now, for this movie, I might torrent it. Whatever, I'm not a thief, but I might wait till it comes out on VOD 3 months from now, but probably not. You got to strike while the iron's hot, because remember, all that marketing is pushing that film right now. The iron's hot now. You want people to go to the theater and make the most money, but if you're not going to make the money there, then why not just make it just as quickly by releasing it on VOD and streaming immediately? I mean, why the hell not? It doesn't make any sense to me. Hopefully, independent film and the more arty distributors will understand that if you're going to spend $20 million to market The Big Sick, and it doesn't break out the way you want it to, screw it. Okay, cool. Why put it on Amazon Prime in August at the end or September, and then everybody wins and everybody gets to see it, and it does well at the Oscars, and it maybe wins an Oscar, and then you have prestige where you can make more films and all that kind of stuff. But I'm clearly dragging right now as I get to the end of this. Landline was another limited release. I just want to point out how terrible it's doing. It opened up on 4 screens. I don't say this to say these films are bad. I love art films. I'm gonna see Landline. I love what's her name? Jenny Slate. I think she's fantastic. But there's no audience for these films. There's no audience for Landline in New York and Los Angeles. I think it takes place in New York. There's just, if no one's gonna see a film in New York, then no one's going to see the film in Columbia, South Carolina. That's just how it works. I don't know. Maybe they're just releasing it to put it out there. It just sounds like such a waste of time and money. I'm sure Landline is a great film. Put all those resources and get it up online and people will watch it. Art films are about people watching them and experiencing them. They're not about making money. Right? And if you want to make money, then go work for a big studio or make a movie that's going to connect with a lot of people. I can tell you right now, Landline's not that movie. It's an art film. I can tell from the trailer. I like it because I like interesting, creatively rich films. Right? That's not most people. Most people are not going to want to see that movie. And so I don't know, another diatribe that I'm going to go on. But Landline should be on streaming now. It never should have got out of the theaters. I could see him doing it for Oscar eligibility. And I guess I'm cool with that. I don't know why the Oscars just doesn't get rid of it. You know, like a film's a film. Just make it based on runtime. And that way everything's eligible for Oscars then. I'm sure they'll, there's some union thing involved where they don't do that. All right, enough of me blabbling about the top 100 it seemed like. What's coming out next week? Actually, tomorrow, technically. Atomic Blonde is coming out. The Focus Features sort of action movie. Charlize Theron is the lead. I don't know what they were thinking. I guess this is a John Wick play. It's also the Summer of Women, so maybe a female John Wick movie is going to do well. I don't fucking know. John Goodman's in it. I don't know who the director is. Oh, it's his. What do you know? The director did John Wick. How convenient. It had that style to it. I guess that's why I brought that up. I had no idea that he was the director. I have no idea how this is going to do. I honestly don't know. $30 million budget, rated R, probably a hard R, super violent. I get the feeling that it's not going to do well. It's the wrong time to put this film out. We're in the doldrums of summer now. It just doesn't feel like a winner. Despite the fact that it looks cool. Maybe it has like the John Wick thing where it's actually really good and it becomes kind of like a cult film. That is a possibility. And I don't doubt that could happen. But I just don't think it's going to do great. It's open on 3,300 theaters. Also opening up next week is the Emoji Movie, 4,000 theaters. I don't even care about this movie. I guess I'll talk about it. But who knows what that's going to do? Maybe 20 million, maybe 25 million, maybe more than that. I can't remember what Angry Birds did, but it's probably something like that. Actually, Angry Birds did a lot more than you think, now that I'm thinking about it. It had to be like 40 something. Now I had to like find out exactly what it did. Trolls did 46 million. So maybe Angry Birds did 38. Yeah, I was wrong. Those movies did a lot more than I thought. So maybe Emoji goes in the 30s. Who knows? Detroit's coming out in limited release this weekend. Keep your eye on that one. The distributor is kind of indie-ish. But it's Catherine Bigelow? Bigelow? Why am I like retarded? It's Catherine Bigelow. And I don't know. I get the sense that I could break out. I get the sense that it could. Maybe not. Maybe it's the wrong time for that movie to come out. Maybe it's more of a fall movie. But the trailers are great. The actors are great. And the director's great. So you can't go wrong with that. And then we really get into the doldrums. The Dark Tower comes out on August 4th. Kidnap, I don't know what that is. Comes out also that weekend. And then it just goes down the tube by the second weekend in August, and that's really the end of summer. Annabelle Creation comes out. Who knows? I love Annabelle. I thought it was a great movie. Like, because I'm a horror film nut. That's why I liked it. I love the Conjuring films. I love Insidious films. They're so scary. Annabelle Creation doesn't look as scary. It looks kind of like a second tier product, but that's probably why they're releasing it on August 11th. The Glass Castle. I saw the trailer for that. It looks really good. Woody Harrelson looks great. Brie Larson looks fantastic. She's always great. I don't. Why are you releasing this in August? It's an Oscar film. There's no reason you release it in August. Dumb. Nut Job 2, Nutty by Nature. I don't even know what that is. Animated film by Open Road Films. It's gonna do terrible. And then it's weird. It's the next 2 weekends are pretty. Next 3 weekends are pretty quiet. Probably the biggest one the next 3 weekends is going to be the Dark Tower. Probably actually Emoji, then Dark Tower. Who knows? Maybe Annabelle will break out. Then we have a little upswing on my birthday, August 18th. The Hitman's Bodyguard, I think, has the possibility of breaking out, potentially. Lucky Logan might break out. Really strong trailer. Steven Soderbergh, great cast. But a tough weekend to come out on. right before school gets back in the swing. No one goes to see movies then, it feels like. So there's a little bit of an upswing. Then on 25th, there's like all these movies coming out. I don't know any of them. I haven't heard of Polaroid, a horror film. What are these films? And then the 1st of September, you have Unlocked, which I don't even know what that is. It's pretty much kind of boring all the way through until it comes out on September 8th. So it's going to be kind of a slow month, I think, but whatever. I'll keep doing the show and keep talking about this stuff because I love it. That's all I got this week. So thanks for listening, guys. Follow me on Twitter. Give me a shout out on SoundCloud, whatever. This has been the Wildline Podcast.